welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The month of November 2022 will be remembered as a crucial moment for multilateralism, and Asia is playing a key role. From the East Asia Summit to the G20 Summit and the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, leaders from politics, business, and the international and regional organization all strongly sought to speed up economic recovery through cooperation. As all these events all took place in Asia, it is not only the Asian hospitality, but more importantly, Asia's attitude toward global governance and rebuilding trust has been recognized by all. On these and more, I talked to Danilo Türk, now President of Club de Madrid, an organization made up of retired political leaders from all over the world. Mr. Türk himself also served as President of Slovenia and for years at the United Nations. Mr. Türk, what a pleasure to see you once again.
A pleasure is all mine.
You know both the Chinese and the American leadership, the presidents today. So how are their encounters and the qualities of their discussions do you see be of relevance today?
Now, obviously, this doesn't come overnight and one has to be patient with the results. But there is a clear agenda. Very fundamentally, I would say, both the United States and China have to demonstrate their commitment to coexistence and cooperation. We have had a lot of, I should say, competition, some tensions, and now we know this is not productive. Competition is necessary, but so is cooperation, and finding a proper balance is the task of the leaders. And I hope that this actually will be shown in the aftermath of the summit.
Cold War mentality, China has been, together with many countries, including your home country, Mr. President, against the Cold War mentality, because we all remember those days. It's not very long ago. But under the current circumstances, it seems that things are moving, unfortunately, toward some likeness of Cold War phenomenon. So do we still have the time? Do we still have this opportunity to reverse that trend?
I think the answer is yes. It's clearly yes. And during Cold War, what we had was two worlds or several worlds. I mean, the level of interdependence was much lower. Now, I think no serious politician in China, in the United States, in Europe, or in any other part of the world can seriously think of, reforming the world towards the past divisions. I mean, the interconnection is so intense that that would be a disaster for everybody. And although this, in the daily polemic, this is not clearly visible, I'm sure that the political leaders understand that well. One cannot decouple from China. That's nonsense. I mean, one can, of course, redefine things, and coupling and decoupling, of course, at some level has always been there. But you cannot decouple, fundamentally and move back to the kind of fundamental divisions of the Cold War, where actually we had two different worlds. The capitalist and the communist world. That's not the case now. China is very much part of the American reality, and America is very much part of the Chinese reality. The coupling has no future. And therefore, I think the Cold War mentality is really something of a more political and, if you wish, superficial nature. I mean, this is a kind of superficial politics that is coming in and cannot, and I'm sure will not prevail.
I remember Dr. Kissinger from the US recently said in an occasion, he was trying to explain the mind of how the Americans, quote unquote, see it and how, quote unquote, the Chinese see it. And he described the US way of seeing the world as they see a series of challenges emerging and therefore deal with one after another with the hope that once they're resolved, it will not be the problem. However, he also explains his perspective about how the Chinese sees it. He said that the Chinese see it as solutions to the problems today would also lead to other challenges that will need to be resolved in the future. So these are, as to him, different ways of looking at things, and therefore deciding on the end results and the road to reach the conclusions. From your perspective, how do you see a G20 summit be able to help the leaders to communicate these different approaches?
Well, this is, of course, a very deep question, and I have great respect for Dr. Kissinger and his work, his life work for bringing the West and China closer together. This is a huge success, and obviously he learned a lot in the process. So he is extremely well qualified to explain the different approaches, different cultures, and different perspectives, even in situations when the goodwill exists. You know, we may have goodwill to solve problems, but we do not quite understand what comes after that. If we are moderately successful in dealing with climate change, we shall change the world in ways which would require new solutions. And I think that, you know, learning from the Chinese tradition is important for such purposes. Now, G20, unfortunately, is a group of leaders who have very immediate tasks. They of course have to understand long-term visions, but they have to resolve problems of today. So they have to figure out which are the concrete things that need to be done today in order to open up the path towards solving the problem or problems. I do not have a very good idea of how current G20 will help in that regard, but I have hopes. I have hopes, like many people do. I mean, these are people, the leaders of G20 can give a sense of direction that diplomats in the United Nations and in other forums can then, you know, develop further, that business communities can develop further, and so forth. So the important thing for them would be to give a signal, look, we do not know the solutions, but we know that this is the direction, and solutions will be something that comes as a result of a collective effort. That's the message which people nowadays need, because otherwise the fear of divisions will simply be too strong, and that's very bad for any attempt to solve problems. Now, the immediate thing is this: let us try to build a minimum or a modicum of hope and trust that we understand the problems and the need to cooperate. And then, of course, there will be thousands of actors who will get involved in that. And I guess that progress on that basis is possible.
Of course, G20 is a perfect platform for international governance and a demonstration of how sophisticated or not international governance today is. Above that, China, for example, Mr. President, you are much aware that has raised the Global Development Initiative, GDI, and also Global Security Initiative, recently, GSI. Now, how do you see countries, economies involved, including China, will be able to put forward better to serve the overall purpose of global governance?
Yeah, well, look, I think the important advantage of both Chinese initiatives, development and security, is that they are global in nature. Both of them are global in nature. So they have to address the needs of everybody, including developing world, very importantly. Now, we have seen in the recent past that the movement towards smaller groups of so-called like-minded states has happened, but it has not been global, and it is not satisfactory to deal with global problems. So I think the emphasis on the global nature of responsibility and cooperation is critical here. In that sense, I think China has had some initial successes, but of course, much will depend on what happens next and how much echo that will have in the other places.
Right.
I would say there is nothing wrong with like-minded states to get together, but they have to be intensely aware of their global responsibility, which they have to share with others. And here we have a deficit. Now, that deficit can be overbridged. That deficit can be reduced and overcome. And G20 is a very interesting and possibly very helpful instrument to do precisely that.
Very important issue, Mr. President, you just raised, that it's not just China and the United States, it's also how the rest of the world, individually and together, moving toward too, even though the former is very important. So we see some very proactive interactions among economies of the G20. For example, between China and Germany. On the other hand, Germany, of course, is an important player on the European continent as well before the G20 Summit. Meanwhile, we also see the East Asian Summit as well as the ASEAN Summit. So how do you see these important players and their proactive roles?
The effect or the influence of what is known globally as the ASEAN way. The ASEAN way meaning, let us respect each other, let us talk to each other as much as necessary, as many times as necessary, as frequently as necessary to come closer to solutions. Now, I have always highly admired the ASEAN way. I know that countries of ASEAN are not the same, that they have some historic legacies which are difficult to overcome, that they had huge development objectives to achieve, but still they were able to work on the basis of a profound political wisdom. And that is, let us respect each other, let us try to understand each other, and let us meet as often and as many times as necessary to develop results. So I hope that this wisdom will be contagious. That leaders from all parts of the world will learn from the ASEAN way. And that's really quite important.
Thank you so much. Danilo Türk, former President of Slovenia and President of the Club de Madrid. Appreciate it, sir.